For nearly 100 years, reports have surfaced involving a strange animal roaming the central continent of Africa. The animal is said to be semi-aquatic and extremely territorial. It is a known fact that elephants have been found dead, gored to death, by an animal possessing two horns, side by side. The natives call it Emela-Ntouka, killer of elephants. Is this creature a prehistoric mammal? Or is it a member of the Ceratopsian family, said to be long extinct? Or is it something else? We discuss the Emela-Ntouka next on the Ropen Network.
The RRN Ropen Radio Network is brought to you by 511 Tactical, Always Be Ready, by the Creation Museum, Prepare to Believe, by the Ark Encounter, Think Bigger, by Creation Evidence Museum of Texas, God's Word in 6 days, and by the Wildlife Safari, America's top cheetah breeding program. You are closer to Africa than you think.
Hello and welcome back to the RRN Ropen Radio Network, Salem's first cryptozoological network devoted to the study of living pterosaurs. We are broadcasting from the heart of Oregon, Salem's capital. If you've been following us on social media, thank you for commenting and thank you for subscribing. This network was created for you, the eyewitness. I would like to reiterate on something here real fast, folks. If you have recorded or captured something on film or video and you want to share it with us, please be sure to send us the unaltered, unenhanced video imagery. To clarify, in order to examine these files on a professional level, all videos and photographs must be taken in first-person mode. No enhancements. Be sure to tell us the date and time, what camera was used, which direction you are facing, settings of the camera. You get the point. All this information will be used to help determine authenticity for scientific evaluation. Folks, I do have an update for you. I spoke with Dr. Ed Holroyd regarding Peter Otto's orb phenomenon. Here's what he had to say in his email to me. Dear Jacob, thanks for the update on the photo and locations. Being morning photos, then Venus and Jupiter are not involved because they are evening lights in the recent months. Okay. The view of the south overlooks Los Angeles, the Los Angeles area, for which there can be many ordinary explanations. All images have very long digital file numbers, which may be storage numbers in some cloud systems, and unrelated to the original photos. The Windows File Explorer has tools to examine details of each photo, if only date and time. All of them seem to indicate a date and time that is close to when they were transmitted to me. Usually, direct copy of attachments preserves the original photo date and time. Some cameras even save camera perimeters and GPS coordinates if activated. Keep that in mind. None of that is in these photos. Several of the photos are various subsets of an original. Many appear to be enhanced. Yes, they were. Some are obviously of birds. Yes, they are. One set is of a light at the top of a tree canopy. So without access to the original untouched photos, I cannot offer further comments. For scientific value of the original photos, we need date and time, camera location and orientation, and no further processing. Enhancements can be done by the analyst. Those separate enhancements examples can guide the analyst with suggestions of what to look for. Ed Holroyd. So there you go, folks. That's why I wanted to reiterate on this. It's very important. Don't do any enhancements if you want to send us any information. Okay, send us the raw files, and we'll do our best to see what we have in your files. All right? Now for my subject today. Located in the continent of Africa near the Gulf of Guinea lies the country of Cameroon. In 1954, the first reports began to surface about a semi-aquatic animal or creature that is said to be extremely territorial. The strange animal has been seen by the local tribes up and down the Likouala swamp, same region as the Mokele-Mbembe. Now, Lucien Blanou, a chief game inspector in French Equatorial Africa, wrote of a ferocious creature in the Congo, larger than a buffalo, that was considered the most dangerous animal by the Kelle Pygmies. The Kelle called the animal Emela-Ntouka, killer of elephants. Since the 1980s, researchers began their quest into the Cameroon, hoping to gather more information about this elusive beast. And as I mentioned prior to, there are only a handful of people who I feel have been there and done that. My guest today has ventured deep into the heart of the Cameroon in search of variants of prehistoric beasts. My guest is an author, researcher, explorer, and filmmaker. He has been featured on many shows, including Monster Quest and George Norrie's Coast to Coast. Let's welcome to the network from Alberta, Canada, Bill Gibbons.
It is me indeed, yes. How are you?
Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here on the Ropen Network.
You're welcome.
And we finally have you on the network, and I'm excited to hear about this particular creature because it has really piqued my interest, as it will with anyone who's looking to research potential living dinosaurs. And we are going to find out if this is truly a dinosaur. But before we do, Bill, tell me, what led you to presume this field of research?
That's a very good question. This all goes back to my childhood in Scotland. I was about 12 years old. I was in my grandmother's house, and I saw an old black and white movie adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. And that sort of fired my young imagination. Could there be dinosaurs in the Amazon or perhaps in the Congo Basin? And that little, shall we say, seed of curiosity just grew throughout my life until I found myself in my mid-20s living and working in London, and met Mark Rothermel, a biologist, and about the same time, the BBC Wildlife magazine came out with a picture of an artist's impression of Mokele-Mbembe on the cover, and it was all about an expedition led by Roy Mackall, the late Roy Mackall, a professor of microbiology at the University of Chicago, and so we decided to hatch our own plans to explore the Likouala region of the Congo in search of this animal, Mokele-Mbembe, and it just went from there, really.
Fantastic. So it kind of sounds like how I began, too. I actually first heard about reports in 1985 when I was very young. So it really just turned into something else for me. That's where it all began. Of course, I didn't venture into this until the late 90s. But you've written a handful of books, haven't you, Bill?
3 so far. I'm planning another 2 or 3 books in the future, but this depends on expeditions. I'm planning on exploring more of the Peruvian Amazon, right up into the border with Ecuador, and but that's another time. But I'm well in the stages of planning that, including looking into lake monsters here in Canada and the USA.
I've heard. Yeah, I don't want to get off track here, but I do have to touch base on that real fast because that sounds exciting. I had heard you were going to go looking for the OGOPOGO. Is that the case?
That is correct. Well, I think you mentioned that you had David Wetzel on your show.
Yes.
Was it David? Yeah. Well, David and I met, our families were together. We met at a place called the Lake Okanagan Resort in 2013. And we were sitting having coffee and dessert one evening about 6 o'clock. And Dave came up with the idea that we should hire a boat and just go out into the lake for an hour or two, which we did. And we stopped at a location at the west side of the lake, and Dave told me this was an OGOPOGO hotspot. Of course, I didn't think anything of it. But the first thing we saw was these fish jumping out of the water everywhere, like a fish boil, as if a predator was coming up underneath. Then we saw these massive humps come right up out of the water, about 3 of them, with a dermal ridge of some kind running down the length of the humps. My younger son, Andrew, who was with us at the time, said he thought he saw the head of the creature come out of the water briefly. And we just stood there agog at this, and then before Dave realized, hang on, I've got my camcorder, and he ran to grab his camera, the creature moved towards the far side of the bank, and then it went down and just left this enormous wake. So we both, all of us and our family, saw the OGOPOGO, but I'm planning to go back this year, September, October, apparently the best time to see them, the most active, with some very good equipment that I've acquired over the last couple of years.
Wow, you actually seen this potential marine reptile. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Impressive.
Yes, and it was only, I'd say, 20 feet away from the boat.
Okay.
And I've spoken to locals that have seen it. Quite a spectacular thing. There has to be a breeding population of them in that lake, which is quite big. It's 80 miles long. It's over 700 feet deep. It's absolutely packed with fish.
Yeah.
So this creature, whatever it is, whatever the OGOPOGOs are, they are definitely fish eaters, and they're seen with quite surprising frequency, much more so than, say, Nessie and Loch Ness.
I agree with that. They are, and I think that is the right time of the year to see them. I've been told it's September, October, because the water, the best time to view them almost as if it's like glass. When it's calm, you have a great chance of spotting something like that. I can go into theories of what I think that the OGOPOGO is, but that'll be for another time. Bill, how many shows have you been featured on thus far?
Wow, I'd say a couple of dozen, but these include radio interviews with the BBC and the CBC up here in Canada. So I get visits all the time from film producers. There seem to be dozens of them, but most of the time it doesn't come to anything because they're looking for television networks to fund them in order to go to, say, Cameroon, for example. And but the funding is rarely available. But I did make one documentary with Monster Quest for the History Channel, and that was in Cameroon. Yep. I tried to persuade them not to go in March or April because that's the wrong time of year. Dry season is in, water's low. The Mokele-Mbembes, as they call it in Cameroon, have gone into their caves or caverns and sealed them up, like very often like some crocodiles do. And there's a form of reptilian hibernation called brumation that we believe Mokele-Mbembes go into. I tried to tell them, let's go right at the end of January, beginning of February. We'll be able to see them then, but they had a schedule to stick to. So the documentary was about looking for Mokele-Mbembe, not actually finding it.
I see. It's interesting how that goes. But yeah, that's right. You were featured on Monster Quest and other shows that come to mind. Very, very nice work. I mean, this is why you've kind of become a very big, familiar face in this field of research. And I would say you're right up there with some other very popular individuals such as Lauren Coleman, Ken Gerhardt. Your name is out there. And that's why I'm like, okay, is this William or is this Bill? I have to make sure I get the right person here.
I get called both. I mean, I've been called worse things in my time, but Bill is fine.
Which leads me to the next point, because you wrote a book called Missionaries and Monsters, Chronicles Encounters Between Dinosaurs and Man. And the critics of this book suggest that there's not enough emphasis on science, but more religion. But I would say you're on the right track there, though. Although Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship with a living God.
It is. The Missionaries and Monsters came about because throughout the years I encountered or met missionaries who have encountered strange animals for themselves. Now, this was not about religion. This was about people encountering strange animals or unverified animals. And I've actually picked up more reports since that time. So there's a possibility we could expand on a second edition with many more stories in them. And not just missionaries. I mean, I have about 5 or 6 accounts throughout history, going up to 2010, where Westerners have seen Mokele-Mbembes for themselves. And these were people who were there who were engineers and agricultural scientists and everything. But when you mention science, The one thing that I will state right now is that I trust the indigenous people of the places where I go far more than any scientist sitting in his or her
Absolutely.
office in a museum with degrees on the wall,
Yeah.
because they've never been to these places, so they don't know really, that they have no first-hand knowledge of the environment, of the people, and of the challenges that face us when we choose to explore certain locations around the world.
I totally agree. A lot of these skeptics or naysayers would suggest these things are incorrect, or perhaps that we have missionaries who are going out there and bribing the Aboriginal tribes for them to say something and come back with a story. That is absolutely ridiculous. And how would they know unless they've gone out there looking for themselves? I've heard reports about this all the time, and usually I will not name names, but one of the biggest that's been on social media is Trey the Explainer, who suggested that missionaries are paying people to get information out of them, which is so false. It's wrong. Unless you've been there and you've gone traveling, you'll never understand this. And so many people who you mentioned write articles and blogs just ridiculing this field, yet they haven't gone looking for themselves. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Trey the Explainer is, I'm sure he's a very nice person. He has an interesting YouTube channel. I could do with getting a lot more subscribers. I mean, I think right now my channel, Crypto Hunt, is at just over 6,000. But you see, what I did was, in answer to Trey the Explainer about Mokele-Mbembe being a myth, I put together a video on my channel. It stated why Mokele-Mbembe is not a myth. And basically, I just outlined 15 different ethnic and tribal names for this animal, because throughout Equatorial Africa, that's mainly the Congo Basin, stretching into Central African Republic and Zambia and so on. I've named the tribes, the languages they speak, the sort of tribal cultural society that they have, and the different names they have for this animal. But here's the thing. The description of the animal remains exactly the same. A bulbous body, 4 stubby legs, a long thin neck with a small head like a snake or lizard, a long flexible tail, grayish-brown in color, lives in deep swamps, rivers and lakes, is most often observed or encountered when it is feeding, and its diet is entirely vegetable. You know, it's feeding of the fruits and leaves of trees, the branches of trees that overhang the river. So when you go right into this kind of research, and you find that if the Mokele-Mbembe was simply a mythical animal, or say a religious reconstruction, it would usually only be confined to one particular animal, one particular tribe, but it wouldn't be so widespread. So when Trey the Explainer is perfectly entitled to his opinion, but like most of the skeptics I have, they've never been there.
Right.
They've never explored the area. They've never spent any time with the people. So, you know, I really don't pay that much attention to them.
Agree. Strongly agree on that one. And before I move on to the actual creature we're going to talk about, you just piqued my interest when you speak about the Likouala or Mokele. And I wonder if this creature isn't as large as going back to the ancient world where we had giant sauropods, which I do believe this creature to be. It is definitely a sauropod in my opinion. And I wonder if it's like maybe a smaller sized version. What's your opinion on that? Is maybe we dealing with a smaller sauropod of some sort?
Well, the description is typical that of a sauropod. The critics, again, when they looked at Roy Mackold's book, which I have here, the classic, which is A Living Dinosaur in Search of Mokele-Mbembe.
Mm-hmm.
Roy signed it, by the way, for me.
Wow.
You see, the critics say, well, all these drawings, these artist's impressions of Mokele-Mbembe in his book are wrong, because it was a drawing of a sauropod with its tail hanging, just sitting on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Now, but when we questioned the people, they say, no, it keeps its tail high, and the tail swings back and forth as the animal is walking on dry land, moving from one water source to another. But on the question of the size, the reports that we get from the Likouala region of the Congo Basin is that the animals are between the size of a hippo or an elephant. Now, forest elephants are much smaller, of course. So you're talking about an animal with a head height of, say, 10 feet, with a length of 20 to 30 feet, a body bulbous, much like a hippo, and 4 little stubby legs, but with a rooster-like frill running the length of the head and neck. We believe that is a feature of sexual dimorphism in the species. But when you go to Cameroon, to these really big, broad, deep rivers like the Bumba, the Ja, the Sanga, the animals are described as being much, much bigger than elephants, head height equaling that of a male giraffe, about 18 feet. We've actually found leaves and fruits stripped to that height off the tree branches in the Bumba River, but there are no giraffes and no elephants in that area. So the only animal that has the head height and the size to consume leaves and fruits at that height in that area is what they call Likouala. That's the Baka people, Likouala. Whereas the Lingala name is of course Mokele-Mbembe. But again, if you don't have my PDF book, it's a handbook called the Mokele-Mbembe Handbook. I'll just email you a copy.
Please, yes.
Because it names all the different ethnic, cultural, and tribal groups, all the different names they have for the same animal, and the descriptions they give for the animal, which is fairly consistent. All this has taken an enormous amount of work and research, but it's well worth doing it in the end, because it shows the skeptics, look, we're doing our homework here. We're not just going into these locations and talking to the people, but we're actually doing the research and taking it another step forward. But having said that, we're really standing on the shoulders of giants like Roy Mackall and Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan Sanderson, all the great cryptozoologists of the past. And I feel so privileged to having met most of them at one time or another. But it's fascinating research, but it's tough work, because it's a challenging area to be in. But here's the thing, we're getting reports of exactly the same kind of animals in Papua New Guinea and in the Peruvian Amazon, right up to the border with Ecuador, and even in parts of Venezuela. And they talk about the same animal, its size, its morphology, the type of food that it eats, the kind of environment it lives in. So the Congo Basin is not the only place you might find an animal that could be a living dinosaur. There's other locations around the world, but they all have one thing in common. They're all remote. They are densely forested areas. They have hundreds, thousands of miles, in some case, of deep rivers, swamps, lakes, inland jungle lakes that are very hard to reach. But I'm convinced that one day we will find what we're looking for, and the latest in technology will help us, such as drones, sonar equipment, ROVs, and night vision, and so on. So I'm looking forward to the next 10 years, provided I'm fit enough to keep up with the next 10 years.
Well, I guess I should ask the question, how old are you now, sir?
I am now 65 years old.
Okay. Seems like he still has a lot of energy.
Well, I work out, I mean, I don't smoke or drink, I eat healthy, and I've been eating rubbish these last couple of years because I lost my wife 2 years ago to cancer. And the 32 years I was married to her, I was eating lots of Chinese food, because she was ethnically Chinese.
Sure.
But now I've kind of, after a couple of years of being miserable and doing nothing, decided, well, this is not good, so I've got to do something. Yeah. So I'm working out, I'm eating healthy, and I'm planning future expeditions. I'd like to think I've got at least another 10 years ahead of me of good, solid research. And the beauty of working in Cameroon or Congo is we have good, solid contacts there to help us, including going to Peru. I was there before, picking up reports on this giant black snake-like thing called the Sachamama.
Yeah.
Which I know a missionary saw one, so I've got an eyewitness, a Western eyewitness there. And the plan is, if I could tell you this, for Peru next year is I'm hoping to fly into a location of the Peruvian Amazon, which is very remote and I'm told dangerous. The only way in is through float plane, in or out. And they tell me that there's a village there where a dinosaur had died not long ago, And in the low water of the river, its bones are exposed, and the village children play on the dinosaur bones.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but hiring float planes or even riverboats and going into these areas is very expensive.
Oh,
See,
yes.
this is why I've started a Patreon account on my YouTube channel. I got 3 so far, but the beauty is if we can get into these locations, we will make a lot more in the way of good discoveries, because we find that the inhabitants of the Peruvian Amazon are not superstitious like the Baka Pygmies of the Congo.
Yeah.
They're willing to take you to places where you can see things. So that's why I'm so keen to get back.
And
But it's all down to financing.
yes, it is. The finance always is the difficult part, finding someone who can help promote and get you there, because we need more researchers in this field. Truly do. And my condolences for the loss of your wife. I was not aware of that, and I know that's tough. It
Yeah,
really is.
that's very
Long
difficult.
time.
But yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill, this creature I'm about to talk about or try to get to and try to understand just kind of popped out to me, stood out, because I wonder how many variations we could be looking at here. Or if it's true, maybe the rumors are true, where you might be dealing with a living dinosaur. But this is, well, the reports started in the 1950s, and they surfaced referring to an unknown animal that the Baka Pygmies, or it could be others as well, called the Emela-Ntouka. And I'm hoping I say that right. Is it Emela-Ntouka?
Emela-Ntouka is a Lingala. It's a Lingala name. It means killer of elephants.
Okay.
And what this is, in fact, I've got reports going back to the 1930s, and big game hunters and wildlife officials back in the
Even
days
further.
of the colonial past.
Okay.
There's an animal that's semi-aquatic, about the size of a hippo, has a very large single nasal horn, some say made of polished ivory, and it will attack and disembowel elephants if the elephants get into its territory, which is always some part of a river. Now, at first, Roy Mackal thought this was the native talking about a rhino, but the problem there is that there's 3 species of African rhino, and none of them can swim. African rhinos can't swim. They can wallow around in mud and stuff like that, but they can't actually swim across a river or something. And in the national parks of Africa, whenever there's a confrontation between elephants and rhinos, the elephants always win because they're so much bigger and so much more powerful.
Yeah.
But this creature, the Emela-Ntouka, most rhino horns are made of keratin, fibrous hair, whereas the horn of the Emela-Ntouka we are told, is made of polished ivory. So it's something quite different. And in 1981, Roy Mackal had a rival to go to the Congo. His name was Herman Regusters, and Herman was a jet propulsion engineer from Pasadena, California. I think he was probably the first African American to explore the area. He went to Lake Tele. Now, on that trip down what we call the Likouala Oserb River, which is English for the river of grass, because you got these big lumps of floating grass floating along the river, they found the bodies of 2 dead elephants on the riverbank. When they examined the elephants, they found that the elephants still had their tusks, which eliminates poachers. But both elephants had these big puncture wounds in their abdomens. And Herman Regustus' guides got very afraid and said, this is the work of the Emela-Ntouka, the killer of elephants. Now, that's in Congo. In Cameroon, the Pygmies talk of a similar animal, except this animal, the Ngubu, horned one, has 2 big horns coming out of its head.
Okay.
And so when I go there, I take a flip chart of all these different animals that we know of. I showed them pictures of the bear and the elk and the moose and all that, and they said, no, those animals don't live here. Then I show them pictures of known African animals, such as the rhino, the gorilla, the chimpanzee, the elephant. Yeah, they pick all those out pretty much. And then when I showed them pictures of extinct animals, but in particular, the Arsinotherium. The Arsinotherium, according to zoologists, went extinct the most recently 10,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But there might still be a few still around. Now, the Acinotherium, they now know, or they now believe, could swim like a hippo. And that fascinates me because with this twin horn animal in the rivers of Cameroon and Congo, or Cameroon, I should say, it's fascinating to me because back in I think a few years before I went there, which was for the first time in November 2000, the Baka people, they have a habit of digging elephant pits and putting sharp stakes in them. So the elephant comes along the elephant trail, falls into the pit and is killed. And but on this particular occasion back in 2000, they found a strange animal in their trap, and it had these two big horns coming out of its head. And so when I showed them a picture of the Acinotherium, they said, "Yeah, that's it. That's the animal we know about." So you never know. There could be an Acinotherium or two still around. But if I do go back to Cameroon, what we're going to do is float down the Bumba River. And along the way, we're going to put up trail cameras, and then we're going to put them along the river and in the game trails. And then on the way back up the river, we're going to use electric engines so that it's nice and quiet. And then we're going to collect the cameras on the way back and see if there's anything interesting that we may have found. Because we have to utilize the best technology we have available to do this. And David Wetzel wants to do this in, I think, January next year, which would be a perfect time. That's Mokele-Mbembe activity, perfect time. And the water level is going down, so it's easier to see something.
Okay.
Everything is more exposed. And the pygmies tell us that at that particular time, the Mokele-Mbembes are feeding, going into a feeding frenzy, fruits and leaves and so on, before they go into their caves and seal themselves up for the dry season. So who knows, we might even see an Emela-Ntouka or an Ngubu at the same time, hopefully.
Which means, so the Ngubu is just another word for the Emela-Ntouka because it's a different region?
Different language.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. How many languages are in the Cameroon alone?
Cameroon has, let me think. I'm thinking Cameroon has probably about over 52, 53 languages. That's just in Cameroon.
Okay.
The Congo Basin has a variety of dialects, over 230 dialects in the Congo Basin alone, and all from different ethnic and tribal groups. So when the critics say, "Oh, well, all these pygmies come from different areas," and they sit down and they share these stories to tell white people about, that's absolute tommy rot. They all speak different languages, and so communicating with each other is going to be difficult.
Okay.
It's like me trying to communicate with somebody from Russia. I don't speak Russian. He doesn't speak English. So, communication is going to be very limited.
Yeah. And I will ask you this too. How big is this river where you'd want to set up the game trail cameras?
Well, the Bumba is, I'm guessing it's about 200 miles, over 200 miles long.
Okay.
So we found a location where it's a dirt track. We can take a truck down there and then start our journey all the way down the river, and we just stop off at different places at night.
Yeah.
So we want to float the length of the Bumba River and then come back north on the Bumba River with electric outboards, which cuts down the noise and perhaps will help us to see.
Yeah.
One thing we did see there, at one time was a monitor lizard. They're very common there, the Nile monitor, but this one was about 7 feet long.
Okay.
And they're very large. So by the time you go like this with the camera, it's gone.
Elusive.
So you have to be very quiet and stay quiet, because if you want to track a very shy, elusive animal, you have to think like that animal, and really go out of your way to just be invisible and be quiet.
Agree.
Until something shows up.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this creature is semi-aquatic. Okay. So how much time does it spend in the river, would you say?
That's a good question. Apparently they can go into the river like a hippo and just sink down to the bottom and hang around there for a couple of hours, about 2 hours maybe. They say that in the Congo, the Kelle Pygmies said it was a forest rhino,
Okay.
but can go in the river. and it chases away elephants and hippos or kills them.
Okay.
So in Cameroon, I think this twin-horned animal, this possible Arsinotherium, is pretty much the same. They say it can go in the river and it can go under the water and it can hide there for a time.
Okay. It's interesting what they agree that it's most likely an Arsinotherium because they mentioned the two horns. Are they side by side or are they?
Yes.
Okay.
They're coming out of the head like this, side by side.
Sure sounds like an Arsinotherium. Sure does, because we're talking about a mammal that's a prehistoric mammal that most likely would be semi-aquatic. Get this too, folks. There have been fossils of the Arsinotherium found in Africa, over in Asia. Asia has fossils of these creatures. That's not to say that they couldn't have migrated down to the Cameroon or other areas. Most people will probably say, oh, they probably didn't, because you're leaning more towards an evolutionary theory, where we tend to lean more towards the arc. People did not spread out, animals did. Okay. It actually helps to understand something about when people mention the possibility of a ceratopsid. It doesn't seem to fit, because especially if they're going to point out, you're going to show them a picture, and they're going to say, yes, that's it. So that kind of changes the ballgame for the Ceratopsian theory, does it not?
Well, it does. The fossils of the Arsinotherium have also been found in Angola, which is very, very close to the Congo. And so with all these mystery animals that we read about all over the world, they've all, at one time they were plentiful, now they're getting rarer and rarer, but that's because they've moved into more remote locations away from human habitation.
Okay.
This is why Mokele-Mbembes are seen in rivers and swamps occasionally, or why the Emela-Ntouka or the Ngubu are reported to be in the big forests of Africa and are sometimes encountered in the rivers. So they're moving away from increasing human habitation and human activity, and moving deeper into the forests and the swamps.
Okay.
So it's possible to me that the Arsinotherium could still be around. Albeit they'll be quite rare, but they're still there. There's nothing to say that they have all gone extinct.
Exactly. We're moving closer now to taking a break for a moment here, Bill. But before I do, I want to go back to the puncture marks on the elephants. How large are they? Did you get a chance to examine this, or just something you've heard that you've read about?
No, I read about it in Regosta's report.
Okay.
But the punctures were significant, quite large, and very deep. Okay. And so that when the natives, who themselves hunt elephants, right? They're not supposed to, but they do. And when they saw the tusks still attached to the elephant and these puncture marks in the belly, they said, "Oh, that's an Emela-Ntouka. We don't want to hang around here in case it's still here." Okay. And they didn't even take the ivory from the dead elephants. They just took off running.
Wow. I see. That says something too. They didn't even take the ivory.
No, they just wanted to get out of there, because in case the Emela-Ntouka was still hanging around. Okay. There was a Frenchman that lived in the Central African Republic. His name escaped from me, but I read much of his stuff, and he picked up on the same reports of the same animal in the Central African Republic. So the animal is a little bit more widespread.
Okay. It seems to me there's been a lot of Canadian explorers who've gone into the Cameroon. Is this correct?
I don't know about Canadian explorers. I mean, I'm the only, I suppose you can call me a Canadian, that I live here, but there's only been myself, and mainly most of the other explorers have been British and American.
Okay.
But I think on the people from France, my friend Michel Ballot. Okay. He always takes a team in with him, and they found incredible things, big footprints that could only be made by Mokele-Mbembe. But I've got photographs of those I'm going to send you, which they're featured in the Mokele-Mbembe handbook. Perfect. So I'll send that to you.
Perfect. And Bill, before we take our break here, when you're talking to the people out there, you're showing them pictures. Tell me about the process of that and how you finally get to showing them something that may be old. Prehistoric.
Okay. Well, what we do is we show them a variety of images. It's simply called they have a name for it in the FBI. I think it's a visual cross analysis system where we show them pictures of Western animals that they don't recognize, so they dismiss those out of hand. We show them pictures of African animals that they know of. Yep, they recognize all of those. Then we show them dinosaur pictures. About 98% of all the dinosaur images are rejected. They don't know the T-Rex, for example. But when it comes to the sauropodian dinosaurs like Diplodocus or Brontosaurus or Apatosaurus and so on, they will always pick that out as being the best representative of the Mokele-Mbembe. And I have, again, photographs of drawings they've made for me that I'm going to send you.
Okay.
Now, also, the other thing that intrigued us was they picked out a picture of a horned dinosaur, a ceratopsian, and they said this animal lives in the savanna on the border with the Central African Republic, and it's got a neck frill, it's got all these horns, and it moves around in small family groups. In fact, my Cameroonian friend, who's an elephant tracker, his name is Pierre Sima. After Dave Wetz and I left Cameroon in November 2000, Pierre went to a village on the border with the Central African Republic in Cameroon, and they had shot one of these creatures for food. And they'd already dismembered it and given the bones to the dogs, and they sold the horns to a Frenchman. He probably doesn't even know what he's got. And Pierre said, "Can you describe it?" So they drew a picture out on the ground of what looks like a ceratopsian dinosaur.
Okay.
Now, we have to be careful here that no fossils of ceratopsian dinosaurs have been found in Africa.
Correct.
So this could be, I think what we could be dealing with here is a very rare, undiscovered armored rhino. But we won't know that for certain until, again, we actually manage to film one of these things. So we might be in luck. I think it might be worth going to the border with the Central African Republic and go with a hunting party into the savannah to see if we can spot and film one of these things.
Wow.
But again, it all takes money.
It does. Yeah. Wow. I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to see that too. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, give some shout out to local businesses. You're listening to Cryptozoological Talk on the RRN Ropen Radio Network. We'll be right back with Bill Gibbons. If you're looking for tactical supplies, look no further than 9/11 Supply, located in Kaiser, Oregon. They have everything from hats, jackets, belts, pants from the 511 brand, and gloves. I got their pair of pants. I used them in Arkansas. Kept me warm the entire time. So the next time you're out looking for your monster, make sure you have the right gear. Gets the job done. 9/11 Supply for all your tactical needs.
We never know when life will test us, when danger will round the corner, when we will be called upon to act with everything on the line. But being prepared gives us the confidence to excel when our whole world hangs in the balance. 511 Tactical. Always be ready.
You know they say it's really big.
What's really big?
Noah's Ark, silly.
Oh, I know. It's bigger than the size of our house.
It's a little bigger than that.
Like the size of 2 houses. No, 2 houses and a spaceship. I bet it's even bigger than the castle.
Don't be ridiculous. That's impossible.
This summer, think bigger.
You're listening to Cryptozoological Talk on the RRN, Open Radio Network, broadcasting from the heart of Oregon, Salem's capital. More and more people are tuning into this subject. Cryptozoology fascinates people. And some people may find it spooky, eerie, because we don't just go into the amazing or the prehistoric. We do talk about some pretty dark things here. I feel that they need to be exposed. Ephesians would tell us to expose the darkness. But the other things are fantastic. When you're talking about possibilities of living dinosaurs inhabiting our world still, we should all gather around and fellowship about that. That's why I created this network. We call it the Ropen, named after the Pterosaur seen in Papua New Guinea. But not just in Papua New Guinea. They've been seen here in the States. Yeah. It always fascinates people to talk about the potential for living dinosaurs. That's why I love doing what I do. But we're talking to a famous explorer right now who's been there and done that. This is Bill Gibbons. And we're talking about the Emela-Ntouka. Whether or not it is a living ceratopsian, or perhaps it is more of a mammal. Folks, I got to tell you, it sure seems like it's pointing towards a mammal. So I hope I'm not bursting anyone's bubble on that one. But yeah, even then, it's still really exciting because we're talking about a potential prehistoric mammal that is still alive. And from what I can tell, it looks like it's the Arsinotherium. One of the theories was that it could have been, or could be, the Elasmotherium. Now let's ask Bill his thoughts on that, because this is supposed to be what some people would consider a Siberian unicorn. But has fossils of the Elasmotherium been seen or found in Africa? Bill, what's your take on that?
I'm not sure about that. I think the Elasmotherium, or the Siberian unicorn, was covered with thick brownish, dark brownish hair, obviously because of the environment it lived in. So the Emela-Ntouka and the Ngubus are described as just having dark grayish colored skin, much like a hippo. So not a lot of hair in the body. So, but you never know, until we actually can get these creatures on film. But I'll give you one thing. There was a French explorer back in the 1930s who was exploring the forests of Gabon. And he came into a clearing and he saw this huge rhinoceros that was just moving along grazing in this forest opening. And its horn had grown so large that it was almost literally touching the tip of its head.
Wow.
And later when he reported this, and when I've looked into this today, apparently there are no rhinos of any kind living in Gabon.
Yeah.
But if you get a copy of a Gabon banknote, there's a little picture of a rhino on it for some reason. I don't know why. But I mean, that alone would be worth going after, because there are mammals that we presume to be extinct for, according to the evolutionists, millions of years. I don't buy into that time scale, but
Agreed.
that have just shown up in marketplaces being killed for food.
Yeah.
That have been accidentally discovered. And one of the critical things, when I read a Wikipedia account of Mokele-Mbembe, it stated that the vast majority of scientists agree that Mokele-Mbembe does not exist. Well, excuse me, but the vast majority of scientists have never been to the Congo Basin, so they don't know anything. But I'd like to point out that over the past 200 years, the most major zoological discoveries were made by non-scientists, by explorers, and even some missionaries.
Correct.
With the help of the local people. Back in 1901 was Harry Johnson, who was a British colonial administrator, heard stories about the okapi. It was an animal that was described as like a giraffe with stripes, but had a shorter neck and a brows and lived in the forest. He took these reports back to London to the scientists of the day and said, look, the pygmies are telling me about this animal. And they said, oh, that's nonsense, probably a mutant zebra. But then he went back and he brought back living and dead examples of the okapi. And the okapi is a dead ringer for a creature known in the fossil record as Paleotragus. So they're basically one and the same. So I think same with the Tasmanian tiger, for example, in Australia. You talk to any,
Thylacine.
yeah, thylacine. You talk to any Australian zoologist or a so-called expert that works for the government in a museum or something, and they'll say that all the thylacines or the Tasmanian tigers have gone extinct, but people are still seeing them today. And so I'd much rather listen to the eyewitness accounts of local people than the opinions of academics who've never been to these locations and really aren't interested. But I guarantee you one thing. If we make a major discovery, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in South America, or anywhere else in the world, I guarantee you the scientists that were poking their noses up in the air at us, they'll be the first ones to go there. They'll be the first ones
I agree.
to get a little bit of the glory for themselves. So,
Well, you mentioned how you like to pay attention to the eyewitness testimonies. Same here. That's what. Now, many have told me that that's not scientific, but I believe it's part of the circle. Okay, because anyone who does investigations understands that you have to get information from somewhere, don't you?
yes.
And if there's an eyewitness who's seen something, a murder investigation, you have to talk to that witness.
Yes.
Do you not?
Yes, you have to establish the facts. I mean, this is why I like to use the flip chart, the cross comparative analysis system, because it works well in getting accurate information. Now, we did try something with the pygmies. We said, oh, by the way, this Mokele-Mbembe, can it turn itself invisible? No, it can't do that. Does it breathe fire? Oh, no, it can't do that. Does it have big wings? Can it fly away? No. So when they're rejecting all these things, this tells us that they're not just telling us what we want to hear. They're giving us accurate descriptions of an animal that lives in the rivers and the swamps. An animal, by the way, they don't like. But here's the thing. They don't understand why we want to find a Mokele-Mbembe. Yeah, they say, well, why do you want to see this animal? We don't like it. It's dangerous. It has what they call a bad spirit, meaning that it's a very aggressive creature. So they don't like it, and they don't understand why we want to see one. And so I try and tell them, well, I come from a country far away with a big lake, Loch Ness, where we have a similar animal with a big long neck. And so I just want to see your animal, and so that kind of said, oh, well, okay, but we can tell you where to go, but we don't want to go with you kind of thing, And so we believe that they're talking about real animals, given the fact that they've described them not just physically, but the type of food that they eat, they inhabit, the locations they like to inhabit, the breeding cycle. They tell us that they very rarely see young Mokele-Mbembes. Maybe once every 20 years or so, they'll see a young one with two adults. That intrigues me because the tuatara lizard in New Zealand only lays its eggs once every 20 years. So that ties in with another intriguing little tidbit of information regarding another very alleged ancient reptilian form called the tuatara.
Yeah, I would say, Bill, that the skeptics will they rely mostly on the theory of evolution. Okay, so they have a preconceived notion of how the world should be, and they're like, okay, well, these creatures are extinct, and that's all there is to it. It's almost as if they really can't think outside the box. But every once in a while, someone does emerge who can. Thank God, because unfortunately, that is the world we live in, where they just have this idea in their mind and they can't shake it. And when someone comes forward and says, I've seen a living dinosaur, then everything just falls apart. But I do agree. Let's say, for instance, we found a pterosaur. People have suggested, individuals who wrote important blogs for Smithsonian or elsewhere, have said that doesn't change anything for anyone. I disagree. You can't sit there and tell me that finding a specimen doesn't counter evolution. No, it defies it because we found a living specimen.
Right.
Answer me that. But they'll say, oh, look, this one probably survived for millions and millions of years. And then here we are, back to square one. However, I still think that finding a specimen is extremely important. I would say filming one is extremely important. And like Dave Wetzel has said, trying to get it from different angles when you're filming, because otherwise people say, oh, look, it's fabricated. It's been, you know, what's happening with AI these days, CGI, it's kind of taking a big foothold here in this field of investigations.
Well, it's an interesting point, very briefly. I know that the pterosaur sightings have gone as far as Texas and Arizona, New Mexico. I'm in contact with a young man who told me he interviewed an illegal immigrant who came across the border from Mexico into the United States. This is like years and years ago, not like the situation we have currently. And he was with his brother, this Mexican fellow, and they said that this gigantic bird attacked them and killed his brother. And he said, "Can you describe it?" And it had a big long beak full of teeth, a big crest on its head. It had giant leathery wings like a bat, and it came down and attacked, because his brother was, they were separating, and attacked his brother and hauled him away and killed him and ate him. And I had the same report from a missionary in Papua New Guinea, who said that he landed close to a village where he needed to drop off supplies. Everybody was very downcast, very morose, and he started asking, why is everybody so down, and he said, well, because one of the Ropens came and attacked a man in his village garden and killed him. What it did was, again, it was a giant pterosaur. The man was working in his village garden. This thing came down, picked him, lifted him up into the air 20 feet or more, and dropped him to kill him. And it did the same again a couple of times till he was dead. Then it lifted him up, flew into a tree, and just ate the man. And so I think while there's a clear danger of investigating things like this, because you don't want to be a lunch for a pterosaur, nevertheless, these reports are well worth looking into. And I'm trying to trace a missionary family who now live in Portland, Oregon. Their son used to call into a Christian radio station. He said, well, they were going up the river in Venezuela, and a gigantic pterosaur flew right overhead. And they reckon this thing, it was like a Quetzalcoatlus. They said that the wingspan in this thing, according to their estimation, must have been close to 50 feet. And there have been gigantic pterosaurs observed from time to time in the Amazon. So
yes,
with all these reports coming in, but from non-native people, by Westerners who've seen these things for themselves, that adds really a strong credibility. Because what is flying around today that has a wingspan of 50 feet or more?
Nothing.
So I think that these things are well worth looking into. And who knows, if I can get back to the Peruvian Amazon next year and get into that remote part of the Amazon, then who knows what we might find. But like I said, it's all down to funding. So I've got a year to get that sorted out before we decide if we can go anywhere.
Yeah, you were mentioning the case that was Finnshaven in the 1980s in Papua New Guinea, where that man was attacked, and that was from reports. I went and looked at this report. They put down unknown animal in the report, but the villagers knew better.
Yes,
they knew it was a Ropen that attacked and killed this person. We rarely get cases when they actually have killed someone, but every once in a great while there's something. A story does surface that people have called. Most of the things I deal with, people call me. They don't usually want to appear on the network. That's something that's a benefit to the viewers. But most of the things I'm dealing with are phone calls.
right.
So, but rare cases of someone losing an arm or just being eaten alive or being extremely attacked by these things. For the most part, they get to observe and they get to live. Bill, let's go back real fast to the Savanna creature, which the people believe could be a ceratopsid of some sort. I'm guessing that might point towards a Styracosaurus. Would I be wrong?
No, you'd be absolutely right. That's the closest description we could get from the people was a Styracosaurus. That was the one ceratopsian that they consistently pointed out in our efforts to get information. And you see now, 23 years later, from my first trip to Cameroon, we can go into those locations and we can fly these areas with drones. Some years ago, a Japanese team went there, hired a plane, and had someone fly them around the savannah, but they didn't spot anything. But I think the point, what they're missing is they need to go on the ground into the villages, talk to the people, determine the best time to go out, and then they go with the village people who are also expert trackers. They can track these things, and then we can make our film. So that is something, like I said, I'd like to do, and I can't do everything now that I'm kind of pushing it a little bit in age. But the one thing I really did want to look for was the Nepal dragon, which is in my book, Missionaries and Monsters. But if I could send a team there instead of me going in my stead, then they would have, I think, a high degree of success of finding that, because it's a terrestrial animal, sits on the ground, very slow moving, and it eats the local bison, and so the people again know exactly where to find these things. When it comes to the Styracosaurus or the Emela-Ntouka, I think there's a high degree of probability we could find something like that, because it's living on the ground, it's in a savanna area, and it can be tracked by the local people. So that's something well worth considering. So what you need is two teams. You want one to go the river and swamps, team two to go into the savanna.
And you need someone to act as a liaison.
Precisely.
And actually, we had something like that, a case for us a while back, where a lady wanted to go into Granite Tor of Australia. There had been a lot of reports of thylacine being seen in those areas, and she was determined to prove that. I felt we really needed someone who was a little bit more experienced than myself. So I actually referred Ken Gearhart to that one, and I have to talk with him and see how that went. But apparently you got reports there, and you got reports in Australia of those animals still being seen today. So I only suppose everybody assumes everything's extinct. No,
I know.
No, we don't know that everything's extinct. Yeah. So we pretty much come to a conclusion here. And when you're doing this, you have to have a process of elimination. The eyewitnesses state that we have a creature with a big single or double horn. It sounds like it's a double horn, side by side, that sure fits a semi-aquatic mammal, prehistoric mammal, large one that could take down an African elephant. And it sounds like it's really pointing towards the Arsinotherium instead of a Ceratopsian. And like we had mentioned, there are no fossils found of Ceratopsians in Africa yet. That doesn't mean that they maybe didn't roam those areas. We just haven't found the bones.
Right.
Okay. So it sounds like this is more pointing towards an Arsinotherium. That's my conclusion. And I'm wondering, I think that probably Bill feels the same way, especially with the eyewitness reports. Okay. Yeah. We really want it to be a Ceratopsian, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. But when we have this creature in the savanna, that really fascinates me. We have something to go off of. We have a potential living dinosaur there. And I have to look at the geographical location of the savanna. I hear bits and pieces about it, but could these places really harbor these amazing animals? People always ask this question, Bill. Is it really big enough? Well, have you seen what Africa is? It's humongous. The Likouala swamp is 80% undiscovered. A swamp alone. It's the size of Florida. That's big, folks. Really, really big.
Most of the Likouala remains unexplored. Most of Gabon, the government of Gabon says that 80% of Gabon remains unexplored. And the Congo Basin overall is 1.4 million square miles of nothing but swamp and forest and inland lakes and so on. So, it's a huge area. Now, just remember, if you remember 20 years ago or more, they found a very large species of Asiatic elephant in Nepal. Now, Nepal is a very small country, but these giant elephants were only discovered, at least by Western scientists, 20 or 30 years ago. And some of them stood 10 or 12 feet at the shoulder. They were monsters, like mastodons almost. Yeah. And also in small countries, where animals can hide quite successfully. So, we're making discoveries of presumed extinct animals all the time, albeit small ones. But this tells us that no one knows for certain if the thylacine is extinct, if the Arsinotherium is extinct, if a small sauropod is extinct, and so on, because reports keep coming in. So there has to be something to these reports other than just native myths.
Agree. Bill, the last report of the Emela, or what I know, was back in the 80s. Is that the case?
We had a report of one as recently as 2010 by a Frenchman.
Okay.
A Frenchman who was working. In fact, these French, they seem to have all the luck. You know, I mean, the Emela-Ntouka was saw in the night. Has been seen since by missionaries, by inhabitants, and there was a case where not an Emela-Ntouka but a Mokele-Mbembe, where a Frenchman who was working, he was hired by the Congolese government as a telecommunications engineer, and he was in a town called Wesso, which is at the far north of the Congo Republic, right on the Sangha River, just across from Cameroon. And he went for a walk one morning with, I guess, a couple of, with a South African fellow he was working with. And they looked, this was early in the morning, beautiful, calm day, and they looked across the Sangha and they saw, there's a little island there, and they saw a very large animal climbing onto the island. And by the time they saw the animal, they only saw the back half. It was about the size of a hippo, two short stubby legs, but a big long tail, and the tail was swinging back and forth, and the animal was pushing its way into the interior of this little island, and it was probably looking for something to eat. Now, then it went on the other side of the island, and then they heard the splash as the animal went into the river and stayed in. It didn't come out. If it came out on the other side, it would probably be an elephant. But because of the big long tail that was like 8 feet swinging back and forth like this, it couldn't have been anything like an elephant or a hippo. Now, they then went and told the local natives there what they saw. And the local natives reluctantly said, well, you saw Mokele-Mbembe. And they said, well, how do you know that? And they said, well, because you get described, because around that island in the Sangha River, there was a lot of hippos. But when the Mokele-Mbembe came some weeks before, it chased all the hippos away. And so sometimes, from time to time, it'll climb up onto that little island to look for something to eat, you know, the leaves and fruits and so on. And also going back to the 1930s, in the same area, I have a report of a Frenchman who was hunting in that area, and he saw a Mokele-Mbembe battling a hippo. And it was beating the hippo with its tail. You know, now this is my upcoming video on my channel, The Crypto Hunt, where I'm citing 6 Westerners that have seen Mokele-Mbembes for themselves. That's coming up soon. Excuse me.
Excellent.
My latest one was
excellent.
Yes. So I'm producing more work for my channel now, and I'm hoping to get out and do a lot more research. And one of the things I'd like to do is to go up to northern Canada, in the Yukon, and also into Alaska, because there have been recent reports of mammals, living mammals, and the forests there are vast. So, you know, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But again, modern technology, drones, etc., that will help us greatly. Now, can I make?
Yeah, I've heard reports of those too.
Can I make one? Can I make one little suggestion for you?
Sure.
There's a really interesting American explorer and cryptozoologist called Denver Michaels. He's written a series of fascinating books. This one here, Monsters South of the Border, which is in South America, and also this one, Modern Day Mammals. And he's there. That's it there. I'm plugging my friend Denver here, and he's writing another book on living dinosaurs, mainly focused on the Amazon. So he would be a really interesting guy to interview, Denver Michaels. So
definitely, I'll reach out to him
if you can, yes. But I'm hoping within the next 10 years or so to have at least an expedition every 18 months to go into South America, go into the cryptids of North America, and at least one more African trip. At least one more. Hopefully, anyway.
Bill, I got to ask some more questions here before we wrap up our show.
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned that the people had trapped in Emela, and they had the bones, and I heard these bones were fed to the dogs, but aren't these too large of bones? I mean, somebody was on the way to take a look at this specimen, but by the time they got there, it was too late. So I think a lot of people were asking this question. How can you have dogs devour bones so quickly of something like this, something so huge?
Well,
is that something that's possible?
It's possible because, I mean, Pierre didn't get there till weeks later. You know, so everything, they use everything. They suck the marrow out of the bones, they cook the meat. They sold the horns to a Frenchman. They don't realize the scientific significance of this, so they just saw the horns off and sell them to whoever wants to buy them.
Yeah.
But it's still worth going back to see that and to see if we can find something interesting. As far as the other animals are concerned, we're talking about exploring swamps and rivers and remote lakes and everything, and that's much more challenging than going to a savanna. But worth doing
It is.
because nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I've always said
Absolutely.
that fortune favors the brave. So let's keep it up if we can.
Is it brave and bold?
Well, I think some people think I'm crazy, but more than brave.
They probably think I'm crazy too. Here's something else I want to tap into real fast about the Emela. Is it possible that we're dealing with a hybrid? Now, if you have elephant and elephant, you get an elephant. But what if you have an elephant and a rhino? Now, this is actually, I've asked wildlife experts about this. Is it possible that an elephant, if rejected, would actually go along with a rhino? And from that, they have an offspring.
Right.
That could potentially be something unknown. And when you see this statue, the famous statue of the Emela-Ntouka, it has a long tail. It has what almost looks like aquatic ears, but maybe more elephant ears, but they seem aquatic. Reminds me of that creature Gorgon from way back in the past. And then you see the large horn. And I look at the statue, I'm like, okay, is this a depiction of a hybrid? Is this a mishmash of what people think it is? Or is this the actual creature? Bill, your thoughts?
Well, it all depends on whether we're dealing with first-hand eyewitness accounts or what people have heard, second-hand, third-hand accounts, and so on. Now, as far as the Emela-Ntouka is concerned, Roy Mackall felt that the heavy tail that's often associated with the Emela-Ntouka could just be a confusion with the Mokele-Mbembe proper, which has a long, heavy tail. The interesting thing about the reports we got from Cameroon, the Arsinotherium, or even this Styracosaurus type animal, is that the tails are small. They're long, but they're thin. As for crossbreeding an elephant and a rhino, well, that all depends. They have different levels of chromosomes in their system, which is why early scientists in Nazi Germany and early in Stalin's Russia tried to crossbreed apes with humans. Well, there's different levels of chromosomes in each one of the species, which won't allow that to happen. Now, having said that, in a report in The Lancet, which is a British medical journal, very highly regarded, British scientists reported that they were able to successfully crossbreed a chimpanzee with a human being. And they killed the baby shortly after it was born. I personally don't believe that. I think they'd let it grow and do all kinds of experiments and everything. But it's all very that's all very Frankensteinian, you know.
Okay.
But it sounds to me that it could be, the Emela-Ntouka could be an animal that has been specially adapted for life in the water as a semi-aquatic animal. The heavy tail might be a confusion going on what we've learned, but the floppy ears could very well be real. But we're never going to know all the answers until we actually film one or capture one or find a dead one or something of that kind.
Who created the statue that we see?
Keep looking.
Who created the famous statue that we see online?
Well, the statue, you're talking about the statue that was discovered by the Frenchman, Lucien Blanou.
Okay.
It was created by a local artist based on descriptions he received from eyewitnesses.
Okay.
So who knows? It might be a perfectly accurate representation. At this point, we don't know.
Yeah.
Now that's based on the Emela-Ntouka. Yeah. But if you're going to the Ngubu or the Styracosaurus type animal, of course, the descriptions are quite different. But again, we won't know until we actually are able to observe one for ourselves. And that's why I think we should put all these trail cameras up in all the animal trails in the forest and near the river.
Did they have a name for the creature in Savannah?
They just used the same term, Ngubu. But they pronounce it differently, like Ngubu or Ngubu. That kind of. So how they pronounce it determines what type of Ngubu they're talking about.
Okay.
Sometimes Ngubu, depending on the dialect, Ngubu could mean animal, it could mean horned one, or dangerous animal. But I'd like to get into the savannah and meet the people and talk to them there,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and go out into the bush with them.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Well, you got me intrigued, that's for sure. It got me excited because all this information is something I've been wanting to talk about for so long. And it's good to have finally someone I consider an expert on this. I mean, most people would probably say, hey, no one's an expert. But look, if someone who's been there and has seen things for themselves, that I would think that gives them a little bit more leeway than others. So I greatly appreciate you being here. But before we go, though, you have the channel Crypto Hunt. I urge everybody go there and watch. He has some really, really fascinating videos. I came across it years back, especially when he started talking about being prepared when you go on your adventures, the right kind of equipment you've had, everything you need. Then he talked about giant spiders. He talked about the Mokele and so forth. Great channel. Check it out. Crypto Hunt with Bill Gibbons. But then you have 3 other books that others people can go and read for themselves. They can purchase those on Amazon as well. Missionaries and Monsters. Everybody needs to check that one out. I read it. Loved it. Again, these are the things that actually most people don't realize what kind of an impact they're doing for others. For me, Bill has been one of those individuals who's helped put me on the right track and was helped launch this show for eyewitnesses to come to, tell their story, and fellowship with one another, that these amazing creatures are still out there and they're God's creation, and he should get the glory and the credit for his creation.
Amen.
Absolutely. Bill, what a pleasure. I really appreciate you being here. Great stuff, without a doubt. And I look forward to hearing more. And I sure would like to get you on the network again to talk about OGOPOGO. I have an eyewitnesses coming forward in the next month, if you'd like to listen in on that and be a part of that conversation.
Absolutely. I would love to.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. God bless. Thank you.
All right. God bless. You have a great day.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bill Gibbons on the Ropen Network. Sorry about camera 1, folks. It is on the wrong settings from what I can tell, and I did not want to fix it while broadcasting. This is why the image was too bright. But hey, it's not about me anyways. How many of you know what a unicorn is? Well, yeah, most people should. Well, it may surprise you to know that the word unicorn is mentioned 8 times in the Bible. Yeah, it is. Now, this is where atheists like to poke fun at Scripture. But if they would do their homework, they would realize what this word really means. I will read just a few passages for you so you can understand this. Numbers 24:8. God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. He shall eat up the nations his enemies, and shall break their bones, and pierce them through with his arrows. Deuteronomy 33:17. His glory is like the firstling of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. And they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. If God goes out of his way to mention unicorn 8 times, well, there must be some significance, wouldn't you say? The American Dictionary, Noah Webster, concurred 1828, states, the unicorn, noun, Latin, unicornus, unus, one, and cornu, horn. An animal with one horn, the monoceros. This name is often applied to the rhinoceros, or any reptile or mammal with a singular horn. The sea unicorn is a fish of the whale kind called narwhal, remarkable for a horn growing out at his nose. Yeah, I've seen this. Okay, so we have established something here. It was not until the 1900s the word unicorn was now meant to represent a pagan New Age symbol. This is what we know now as the horse with a horn, which there is no fossil evidence for. All right. To me, this is just another attempt by the enemy to creep into our culture and distort or manipulate the truth. Yep. When I was speaking to the late Joe Taylor regarding ceratopsians, I asked if the word unicorn applies to reptiles as well. His response was, "Good question. I would have to examine this more." Folks, I can tell you that I feel confident the ceratopsians fit in this category. Why? Because unicornus, unus, one, and cornu, horn, applies to at least two genus of ceratopsids. The monoclonius, which has one horn sprouting from the front bill, and the centrosaurus in the same fashion. So the word unicorn does in fact apply to any mammal or reptile with a singular horn. Isn't that something, folks? So when they were anointing the men of Israel with oil, men who would later become kings, they were probably anointing them with the horn of a ceratopsian as well. We hope you enjoyed the show today. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, seek the truth. May God bless every one of you on the other side of the screen. Shabbat Shalom. Peace be with you.
Oh boy, I hope that went well.